All right, so in the Spike app, now this will look really similar on your iPad or desktop. It's a nice and cross-platform. Now we're going to be selecting the Prime option here, not Essential. So we'll click on Spike Prime. That will take us into the home page. And for this little explanation of things, we're just going to be clicking on the New Project button. So later on, I'll show you where to get to the tutorials, but we're going to keep things nice and simple to start off with. So click on New Project. And we're going to be selecting word blocks. Now that's the one which looks the most similar to the coding you've done before in Minecraft and then using the micro bits in year 7. So with that selected, we're going to click create. Now this should look quite familiar to what you've seen in the past. We've got different categories, different colors. We've got a little bit of text there to show you what the different pieces of the coding puzzle do. So it allows you to experiment, try some things out a little bit. All right, so we can just do a simple drag drop of any of the parts onto here, and just like you've seen before, things will snap together. And if we don't want them anymore, we can click and drag them back over here and they'll go away. Now, in order to get our robot to communicate with our Spike Prime software, we need to connect it. So before we can connect our robot, we need to turn it on. So I'm going to press that button down the front there. Okay, that's now turned on. Now we also need to turn on the Bluetooth, and that was the option. We've got the button just there. So if I press that, that's now indicating that it's in pairing mode because it's flashing and it's beeping. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the connect option, and it's asking me what color. Now yours should be green, and if you look up here, it is a green circle around that button. So I'm going to select that. And it's got robot 4 here. Now, when we're doing this as a class, a lot of people will be trying to connect their robots at the same time. So what you need to do is make sure you're checking the number on your robot. So here it says number 4 written in red pen, and that matches up with robot 4 in my options here to connect. So I'll select that. All right, so we've got a successful connection message. That isn't beeping and flashing at us anymore, so that means that that has successfully connected. Now, before we do any coding, we've got some information here about where our sensors are and what's connected to what port and what value it's currently returning. And I can hide that, I can bring that back up. So at the moment, we've got ports A and B, and they're written on the plastic on the front, which is a bit hard to see on the camera. But on the side, each of these ports has a particular letter, so you know what's plugged into where. So our motors, so the 2 motors we've got down the bottom here, they're plugged into port A and B, and it's telling me the values, the rotation angle of where those wheels are right now. So we've got 141 and 47 degrees. So if I rotate both of these, you can see that those values will be changing as I'm going through, which is really handy to get that feedback so you can figure out things like why isn't your code working? How many wheel turns or degrees do I need in order to get where I want it to be? So it allows for troubleshooting and just better development of your code. Now, port C at the moment, we've got our color sensor. So that is that one there, and that's lit up a little bit at the moment. So if I was to look underneath, it's currently saying that it can't see a color. If I was to put that over a piece of white paper, so if I hover that there, then you can see that that's turned to white. If I take it away, it goes back to being transparent again. So that's a color sensor. We've got our ultrasonic. So if I put my hand closer and further away from that front sensor, you can see that those, put that a bit lower, those figures are changing. It's always a bit of an approximation. The further away you get, the less likely it's going to be. You might get a little bit confused with something else. And then we have our little push button on the back, which if I was to press that, you can see that as I'm pressing it harder and harder, it's actually doing different levels of force, which is a really handy thing in your program that you can code it so it'll respond appropriately to how hard it's actually being pressed. Okay, so this is how we're getting into our new program, creating your own thing. You can experiment, you can explore. But what I want to do is go back onto the home page, and the starting point for most of you will be here where it says start. Now, this is going to take you through some of the basics of getting familiar with what the different motors and sensors do. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that as you go through each of these tutorials, they will normally, so I'll click on I'll click on the color sensor. They'll normally assume that you've only got one sensor plugged into your hub at a time. If I go through to the next stage here, you can see they're talking about plugging a sensor into port A. Now, I don't want you to change any of the ports and the plugs on your actual robot because that will cause problems later on. It just means that for this tutorial, where it's talking about plugging into port A, we need to make sure we update the code to be relevant to our actual specific hardware setup. So in this stage here, they're wanting me to drag this bit of code over. At the moment, okay, it is actually saying C, it's not saying A, so it has detected the right port. But just in case that causes a little bit of confusion, that initially it's saying we're using port A, but this has been smart enough to say, hey, actually, you currently have your color sensor plugged into port C, and we can get the confirmation there. All right, so for this first lesson, you're just working your way through those different tutorials. If I go back onto the homepage again. All right, so all of these, they're all really essential things that we're going to need for our programming moving forward. And the last one, number 6, isn't as essential, but it's a handy one to do. So it's kind of cool where you can tilt and you can get feedback on angles and yaws and pitch and all those sorts of things. So you understand what that means if you work through it. All right, so that's it for the warm-up. You work your way through, and just a reminder that at the end of it, to turn your robot off, you hold in this button here, and now that's turned off. So you want to make sure it's turned off fully, and then we're also getting the visual confirmation that my hub's been disconnected popping up on the screen there. All right, so good luck with this, and just ask for help if you get a little bit confused with anything. Okay.